Well, thanks for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
I know you have like only a short amount of time, and you guys you've all been so busy saving our country, Attorney General. So thank you for being on the Sara Carter Show.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sara, for having me on again. And I do feel like I get to see you all the time. I saw you on Sean Hannity's show again. I mean, you are down at the border, bringing so much attention to the crisis and the lawlessness that's going on. So thank you for that. And thank you for having me on again.
Well, thank you for fighting the good fight and for taking it all the way to the Supreme Court, because that is where we are going to win this battle. I'm down at the border. As you said, I was down there for Sean this past week. Terrible tragedy that we lost a National Guardsman. Yes, Specialist Bishop Evans, and is a hero, as his family said. But on that border, you see it. You've seen it yourself. You're from Arizona. You're out there on the border watching the floodgates being open, watching our nation's national security being threatened, and seeing the humanitarian crisis and the toll that this has taken on our nation. Is this the reason why you got involved in the legal fight to keep Title 42 in place?
Well, Sara, you and I have discussed this before, but, I'm a first-generation American, and we've talked about all the time that, my family fled from communism. And the one thing that who has family members that, not only just study history, but lived it, you have this unique appreciation for how fragile liberty and freedom are. As Ronald Reagan used to remind us, it's never more than one generation away from extinction, and it's not something we pass on to our kids in blood, or our blood. It's something that got to be fought for. So fundamentally, to me, this border crisis is a crisis catastrophe. It's not a crisis, it's a catastrophe now, is about the rule of law, because it begins and ends there with the rule of law, that we have to have a sane system that recognizes the very reason why people want to come here is because the rule of law means something. And if you have this chaos and disorder and you enable the cartels to seize control, you undermine the very reason for people wanting to come here and why America is such an amazing country. The second thing is, I know as a gang prosecutor, anything that comes across the border, whether it's human beings, whether it's drugs, the cartels are making money off that. And that means they get more and more powerful. And that means more and more people, kids, nieces, nephews, sons, daughters, are going to die as a result of these failed policies. And we see that in these terrible statistics. And then we also know that it's going to lead to more violence in our communities. And then we also know that the Biden administration literally is releasing people either charged or convicted of serious crimes into our neighborhood because they're refusing to deport them. So you have all of these factors coming into play where they're undermining the rule of law, and at the same time, they're making our country less safe, and they're having taxpayers subsidize it. So it's crazy. It's unfathomable. I keep losing, or I run out of adjectives to describe what they're doing.
I do too.
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm filibustering. Yes, I'm.
No, you're not filibustering. I feel exactly. I'm listening to you, and I feel the same way. While you were talking, I just kept thinking, a perfect storm, a perfect storm. This is a perfect storm leading to probably one of the greatest national security crises that the United States will ever see, because we have no idea, Attorney General, who's in our country. We have no clue.
Well, we do know. And you know this, Sara, the people on the terror watch list have been apprehended. We know when you go down to, the border, there is literally currency and, even newspapers from, countries like Yemen and Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries that are even on the terror watch list. And so border security is national security, not only because of the cartels, but because we don't know who's coming to this country. And, we started talking about Title 42, and our office led the charge, and we got a temporary restraining order to stop the Biden administration from rescinding Title 42, because we know that's going to lead to another flood of people entering the country illegally. But just now, we filed a lawsuit against the Biden administration's attempt to allow DHS now to grant asylum claims. And so this is like the 1-2 punch, where the Biden administration is encouraging all these people to illegally enter the country. And now they want to give DHS, instead of a federal immigration judge, they want to give DHS the authority to unilaterally grant asylum. And so this, I think, is not only going to encourage more illegal immigration, but it's essentially going to grant amnesty for people that are breaking the law and that have entered the country illegally.
Well, it'll let everybody, because everybody can claim credible fear, right? And it doesn't mean that we should accept everyone with credible fear. But I spoke to immigration and customs enforcement officers. I've been talking about this for years, but I spoke to some recently, and they're saying, look, we're not returning hardly anyone back. I mean, we're not sending people back at all. All they have to do is claim credible fear. And now it looks like the DHS is going to have that authority, full authority, if they're allowed to do it, unless you stop them. And it means everybody who's coming across that border is going to give an excuse, a loophole to stay. And once they claim credible fear, all they're given is that, notice to appear. And they never appear. The majority of them never appear. Am I right or am I wrong?
Yeah, it is crazy because we know in the Biden proposed budget that literally there's more than $100 million for legal aid to migrants that have illegally entered the country. And what the system is now is that if you have that credible fear, you have to go before a federal immigration judge, and that person is independent and they make the determination. And in about 85% of the cases, those claims are denied. So it's denied a vast majority of the time. But now with what Biden is proposing, and I think this is so radical, like this is something everyone should be talking about. It literally grants or they want to give DHS the authority now, not an independent agency, but, bureaucrats beholden to the Biden administration and beholden to Secretary Mayorkas, the authority and the power to unilaterally by themselves grant asylum. And if they denied it, they still get to go before the immigration judge. So they're going to get two bites at the apple. And it is absolutely crazy because it's not only inconsistent with the law, but it's definitely going to encourage more and more people, to come up here because they think the Biden administration is essentially, granting amnesty, which if I don't stop them, that's what they'll be doing.
Well, that's essentially what they're doing. That's essentially the message that is being transmitted across the globe, not just in Central America, not just in Mexico, not just in South America, but across the globe. Like you said, in places like Yemen, in places like Afghanistan. I was just talking to some friends of mine who are down in Panama right now at the Darien Gap, and they sent me a photograph of about 12 men from Afghanistan that made their way through the jungle on their way to the United States. There were people behind them from Somalia, people behind them from China. We got people from all over the world making their way up here, and we don't even know who many of these people are because they do not have functioning governments. How can we check with the Taliban if these 12 men weren't ever arrested or detained before for anything when the government itself is a terrorist organization? I wanted to ask you this, Mark, really quickly about what happened in the courtroom, because, the judge obviously supported your argument. You brought a very strong argument to the court. Tell me what happened. How did that play out, just for our listeners?
Yeah, so Title 42, I think everyone knows, was a policy that the Trump administration implemented that basically allowed forced people to be ejected or rejected or returned to Mexico because of concerns about COVID and public health. And so the Biden administration wanted to lift that, and everyone recognized that there was predictions from Biden's own DHS that it would lead to about 18,000 people trying to come over the border illegally every single day. Essentially one of those, full basketball arena or full concert arena, every single day. And so even the Democrats started realizing it was a problem, but they weren't doing anything about it. So me and my colleagues, we filed a lawsuit. And a federal judge said, yeah, the Biden administration is not following the law when it comes to rescinding this. And they have to have hearings. They have to have inputs from the states before they can do anything. So a temporary restraining order basically means the judge thinks that we're right legally, and he wants the Biden administration to stop doing any possible further harm. And so we know that the Biden administration was backdoor trying to already rescind this. And so we were able to stop that. And then our next hearing date will be on May 13th. And so we'll have another hearing before this federal judge. And at that time, we'll get a little more clarity as to how long we are able to put the brakes at the Biden administration.
Well,
but make no mistake about it.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, make no mistake about it. Once again, this is just, Title 42 was only one tool in the toolbox. The Biden administration, with permanent guidance, temporary guidance, failure to build the wall, the case I argued at the U.S. Supreme Court in February where they're trying to give benefits, government benefits to non-citizens. So there's been a whole system and series of acts the Biden administration has done to incentivize, decriminalize legal immigration. And Title 42 is just one more tool. So we're trying to do everything we can to stop this, try to halt it for as long as possible, to make sure to stop the lawlessness. But the Biden administration every day seems to have some new policy or rule, just like the one we sued them over of these asylum, trying to allow DHS to grant asylum. Every day there's something new that's radically undermining the rule of law and essentially, sending out a signal, not only that the border is open, but essentially they're abolishing, ICE.
So what can we do? I mean, what happens now? How long can you hold them off? What are the next steps? Because I know you're doing everything so that they can't rescind this and they can't do it right now, but could they do it like a year from now? Could they try to push? What other processes can benefit the Biden administration through the courts if we can't keep them from rescinding this? Or is this a big win and it's going to stick?
Well, I don't know. I learned a long time ago, even being married to a federal judge, not to ever try to predict what any federal judge is going to do. But I worry that the Biden administration and the far left and whoever's speaking in Joe Biden's earpiece are very organized and they're very methodical. And it just seems like every day, whether it's, the carbon rules, whether it's these, COVID relief bills that are, spending money that we don't have that's dramatically impacting inflation, whether it's canceling pipeline projects. I mean, from, the gas pump to the grocery store to the empowerment of gangs now, the Biden administration is radically altering this country. And so the tools that I have, and some of my colleagues that have joined me, is to fight in the courtroom. And we're trying to make sure that we get federal judges to say, stop, you can't do that. That's a violation of law. But, ultimately, shame on Congress. It's Congress is already a dangerous place when the Democrats control Congress. But when you throw in a hard left president and a hard left administration, it's catastrophic, and we're paying the price for it. So, Congress needs to step up and do its job, and whether that's, having hearings, cutting off fundings for these agencies. And, frankly, why isn't anyone talking about, or not more people talking about impeaching Mayorkas? If anyone else failed in their job that miserably, and we know Americans are dying, we know America is a more dangerous place, why aren't we having impeachment proceedings on Mayorkas instead of those people inviting him to Congress to, do a dog and pony show?
I totally agree. And I'm hearing it from everybody. I've been talking to people, former senior officials of DHS that were under Trump and others who have contacted me, who have said Mayorkas should be removed immediately. There should be an investigation because they know he's lied before Congress. These are telling lies that he is statements that he is giving to Congress right now. And I also wonder, too, why is it so difficult? And I can understand that, but because it's so radically left, this administration, you would think people within these agencies would just come out and just say no more. I'm going to come out. I'm going to give you the information, Mark Brnovich. I'm going to tell the American people what's going on. I'm going to resign because I will not allow the men and women of the Border Patrol to continue to play this dog and pony show. Is it just so difficult right now? Is our bureaucracy are they so sold out that it's impossible to fight it because people are scared for their own jobs, scared for themselves?
I think it's all of the above in some ways, Sarah, because I do know that in our lawsuit that we had against the temporary and then the permanent guidance of the Biden administration, where they were failing to deport people, deportation orders, the interim / acting director here admitted, under oath, and we saw emails where they were saying that this is dangerous, that this is going to that literally means criminals are going to be released into our community. So, when they're under oath, sometimes they, will tell the truth and they'll admit it. But I think part of this sadly, is that you have had this, some people call it the swamp, some people call it the bureaucratic class, some people call it, the apparatchik class, whatever you want to call it. There is this permanent bureaucracy, these apparatchiks that develop in the agencies, and they just stay there, and they seem to only care about themselves and their jobs versus, caring about the hardworking American people. And I also think part of it is that, they when you get these Democratic administrations in place, they hire Democratic or left-leaning people, and then they put them in career positions where then that way when you have a change in administrations, you can't do anything. And I mean, I've heard this frustration from folks, whether it's at Defense, whether it's at the State Department, or, some of these other agencies where, you have these kind of mid-level and even upper-level people that are very, very political that were appointed there by, previous Democratic administrations or the current Democratic administration. And then even when a Republican, becomes or gets elected, those people don't change, and they literally work to subvert the efforts of whatever the Republican wants to do. And then every time there's a Democrat in, they radically accelerate that kind of leftward leaning or leftward lurch of those agencies.
Yeah, well, we certainly saw that during the Trump administration, and it was extraordinarily frustrating. And the swamp was so thick. And I think that was the first time, and I was saying this earlier in the opening monologue of the podcast, it was one of the big realizations that Trump left us with, even though he's out of office. The American people woke up. They actually saw what was happening inside these bureaucracies and how these bureaucracies had been weaponized, down to the point that it's endangering our national security. I want to talk quickly because I don't want to let you go without asking about the Senate race. And you are working diligently, I know that, for the great state of Arizona. And we're 3 months out from the primary. And where do you think you stand in the Republican race right now? I know a lot of people are very excited about this.
Well, I appreciate that. And at the end of the day, Sarah, I'm in a good position just because I'm a public school kid that grew up here in Arizona. I understand the states. I have been involved in all these battles as the Attorney General. I'd never run for office before I was AG, but I was a gang prosecutor. I worked at a free market think tank called the Goldwater Institute. So I have always been about, limited government, maximizing individual liberty, protecting our communities. And, so when I ran for AG, I said that I'm going to push back against the overreach of the federal government to protect our rights. And so whether it was leading, the efforts on protecting our Second Amendment rights at the Supreme Court, whether it's been leading the charge multiple times of holding the Obama and the Biden administration accountable over their failed border policies, whether it's being engaged in protecting life. I mean, I am the real deal, and I think Arizona voters appreciate that I'm a fighter. I mean, as some of our mutual friends, even like Sean Hannity that's supporting me, he talks about the fact that I am a fighter, that I'm engaged in battles. While other people are talking, I am doing. And I think the people in Arizona appreciate that I've always been a straight shooter, and I always tell people that I want to go to Washington, D.C. to not make government more efficient, but I want to make it smaller. And I think as Barry Goldwater used to always say that any government that's big enough to give you everything is big enough to take it away. And because of my own family's background, I think that we need to do everything we can to reduce the size and scope of the federal government in our daily lives. And we see the consequences of a big bloated federal government, and whether it's at our public schools, whether it's the inefficiencies that's happening with our economy and what they've done with gas prices, all that is a consequence of an overbearing and an overreaching federal government. And it's time that we have people in Washington that are like me, that are first generation Americans, public school kids, and the sad thing is, Sarah, when I get to the Senate, I think I'll be one of the poorest people there, and I'm a middle class kid. I'm not, complaining about that. I'm just saying that we need people with real life, real world experiences that represent Arizona values, that represent American values in the Senate. And I think that's why I'm in a good position, and that's why I'm going to win the primary, and then I'm going to beat the astronaut.
You're going to beat the astronaut. I should have asked you about Mark Kelly, because it does seem like Mark Kelly kind of the first time he's actually come out and just opposed anything that the Biden administration has done has been with Title 42. But I think it's because of his constituents, right? I mean, Mark Kelly's really seeing he's really feeling the heat there.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the reality is he's voting with Chuck Schumer nearly 100% of the time. He's voted for policies that have dramatically increased inflation, dramatically increased the size and scope of the federal government. He's tried to undermine our Second Amendment rights and liberties. And of course, he has done absolutely nothing to solve the border crisis problem. In fact, I've said this before. When I'm in the U.S. Senate, if we have Arizonans dying, like we do right now, in places like Pima County, where the number one cause of death now is opioid, fentanyl overdoses, replacing even car accidents, if people are dying, you can't have a senator representing this state or any other state voting for Supreme Court nominees or cabinet officials or any big bloated government bills until we secure our border. That's got to be the number one priority. And he's been AWOL on that. And I'll just say just one really quick anecdote. I was up in Prescott just recently, and Yavapai County is a great place here in northern Arizona. And I was walking, and a couple construction guys were working, and they yelled at me. And I was like, I didn't know what they were saying. I kind of stopped. They're like, beard, beard. You never know what people are what they're going to say after they yell you beard. So I paused to talk to them, and they're like, beard, you need to go beat the spaceman. And then they were all kind of joking, like, it's the beard versus the spaceman. And I thought, that's pretty cool. That's a good preview for November of this year. So
the beard versus the spaceman. I love that. I love that. I'm going to give you an opportunity right now to respond, because I love the way you take the fight. Always, you take it to the courts. You've always been willing to stand up, talk about the border issues, stand up to the Biden administration. You've always been a man of your word on that. You've always come on the show, and you've always shown that you're willing to take the fight to the biggest and the worst of them. And that I admire you for. I did see that statement from Trump a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that about criticizing you for not doing enough, during the 2020 elections. What's your reaction to his statement there? I'm giving you a chance to just address that. And is there any comment that you'd like to make? Do you have any comment you want to say to him?
Look, I think a lot of people are very frustrated with not only how the 2020 election was handled and conducted, but how long sometimes investigations take. But I mean, you think about something like the Russia collusion hoax. We knew right away that was BS, but it literally took 4 years to get to the bottom of it. And I think that the left has had years to perfect their techniques, and sometimes getting to the bottom, that takes time. And I've always told people, whether it's President Trump or whether it's anyone else, that when you're the government, you have the ability to take away people's livelihoods, their life, liberty, property. And with that comes an awesome responsibility. And I'm not like the clowns in New York, the prosecutors there. I'm not going to throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. It's important to get it right versus fast. And, the reality is that we've issued an interim report that points out that, for example, 20% of the ballots here in Maricopa County didn't have a proper chain of custody. And, so there are significant issues when it came to verification of signatures. I mean, they were doing that in less than 10 seconds for the mail-in ballots. And I remind folks all the time that I literally argued the most important election case in a generation called Brnovich v. DNC. And it's named after me because when no other officials are willing to step up during that 2020 cycle, I did. And I literally defended the ability of the states to enact common sense election integrity measures, like limitations on ballot harvesting, limitations on out-of-precinct voting. And as a result of that win, and I personally argued that case, you saw states like Georgia and Florida and other places enact common sense election integrity measures. And so, once again, I know sometimes, as a prosecutor, you're limited what you can say and what you can comment on legally and ethically. I've had people, file bar complaints against me, like when I sued the university over their tuition prices. The Secretary of State here, when we were involved in litigation against her, they file bar complaints. And so when you're the government, you're not only held to a higher standard, when you're a prosecutor, you are limited what you can say when an investigation is ongoing. So I can just assure people that if you look at my track record, I have been a fighter, I have been a brawler, but it's important to do the right thing in the right way. And sometimes some people get frustrated. I appreciate and I understand that. But at the end of the day, there's an old saying, just win, baby. And that's what we're doing, whether it's at the U.S. Supreme Court, whether it's stopping the Biden administration's lawlessness. We have a track record of actually getting the right result when other people are just out there chirping. And I would just remind folks, there's a lot of folks out there chirping, even in my race. Like, where were they? When I was in the federal court fighting the Biden administration's unconstitutional vaccine mandate, where were they? When I was at the U.S. Supreme Court arguing Brnovich v. DNC, where were they? So there's a lot of like fair weather or sunshine patriots, that come out of the woodwork now when they're trying to buy a Senate seat. But my goodness, where have they been when I was taking on not only the Biden administration, but the Obama administration?
I agree with you on that. I know because I'm watching what's happening now with the Durham investigation and how many years it's taken since the very first time I wrote a story in 2016 where we began to expose what was happening to President Trump and under the administration by weaponizing all of these different agencies. You did talk about chirping. I have two more good questions Two more good questions for you. One is the reaction to Elon Musk buying Twitter. The chirping brought me back. And I got to get your reaction here because I think there are legal issues, not with Elon Musk, but with what the government is doing now with the creation now of this crazy disinformation governance board under DHS. So first, your feelings on Elon Musk. Second, how do you feel about the DHS creating a whole new bureaucracy to basically monitor our communications?
Well, first thing with Elon Musk, I will give you a quick anecdote. I remember when Barry Goldwater was still alive, after he was out of the U.S. Senate, I had an opportunity to talk to him, and I'd asked him, I said, well, do you read or do you know all these bills, how in depth do you get on those? And he said, well, I look over at Hubert Humphrey, and if he's for it, then I know I'm against it. And so what I heard, the left heads have exploded as a result of what Elon Musk did. So it must be a good thing, the fact that CNN and all these other commentators are saying how terrible it is. And I think at the end of the day, it's important to have as many vehicles, that we can when it comes to speech. And we know that, there's the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, and these people spent hundreds of millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars last election cycle, giving it to, Democratic election officials. And, even though it was under the guise of, voter turnout, we know that there was a, attempt to maybe influence it in one way or the other.
Oh, let's just be straight. One quick interruption
Sorry.
here, because I want you to go on with that. But one quick interruption. You're absolutely right. They stopped the Hunter Biden story. And they said it was disinformation. And they even had government officials sign on to a document, senior government officials, former CIA, even Michael Hayden, who was a Republican CIA director, and others sign on saying it was disinformation. And now all of a sudden the New York Times comes out and it's like, hey, wait a minute, Hunter Biden laptop story, totally true. It's like, well, that was a bit of disinformation if you want to talk about it before an election.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, sometimes it's blatant and obvious like that, but other times it's less obvious and subtle. And, I was the first AG to sue Google. We have a lawsuit right now in state court. And one of the things that we know about the tech companies, it's not just, stopping those stories or, having people do, manipulate the story, but it's also their ability to throttle stories and to make sure you get certain stories in your feed or not get stories, and how they manipulate you. And the sad part is that a lot of times folks don't even realize they're being manipulated, and they think hey, I don't believe the mainstream media and everything else. But, you mentioned some of those government officials, CIA officials and Hayden and everybody else. They do go on mainstream media, though. They say that, they repeat it, and then the media, and then that becomes a narrative. And then all of a sudden, then they, we saw this even during COVID, where they would throttle or they would stop any sort of contrary points of view. And so eventually people do get manipulated, whether they realize it or not. And, because if, a bunch of other people believe it, then, sometimes people start believing that, well, it must be true. And so it is troubling. And this, just kind of wrapping up, even going to the DHS, what you're talking about, is that this is what happens. And I know you know this because you and I have talked about our family backgrounds. This is what happens in communist countries or totalitarian countries, where you have to toe the party line. And what they do is they start, anybody that doesn't do that media-wise or speaks out against it ends up losing their job, or worse, sometimes even imprisoned, because you become dependent on that central authority. And then we also know then you have these ministers of propaganda and these other folks that really are doing things to, basically feed the party line. And when you have this permanent bureaucratic or apparatchik class in Washington, D.C., you know that they're going to lean left and continue to lean left regardless of the administration. So I think it's a very dangerous thing anytime the government, whether it's DHS or Homeland Security or the CIA or anything else, tries to consciously or intentionally provide information or manipulate anyone in America. That is a very dangerous step on the road to tyranny.
Can we do something legally about this? Because, and I don't want to get into a whole other debate about, I'm going to have to bring you on just to talk about this separately, but think about it. The CIA's job is to function outside of the United States. It's not legal to operate in the United States. They can't manipulate information. They can't run a disinformation campaign inside the United States. And in fact, to run an information campaign in another nation, it's considered lethal. You need the authority of the president of the United States to sign off on any kind of operation, whether that be Iraq, Costa Rica, Venezuela. I mean, because you could get people killed. You could literally get people killed with disinformation. So how is this possible? And are there legal ramifications for this? I don't know.
Well, we're looking, obviously, it seems like every week we have another lawsuit against the Biden administration. So we are looking at that. We're looking at what our possible legal options are. And, once again, where's Congress? Where are the Republicans in Congress? Or even the Democrats saying, no, we're not going to fund this. You can't do this. I mean,
right.
And people that know history, in the 1960s and the 1970s, I mean, you had, the federal government, the FBI, the CIA, basically doing domestic surveillance, spying, infiltrating,
Frank
groups.
Church,
And
the
remember
church hearings.
The church hearings. I was just going to mention the church hearings, and the left came unglued because they're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So it's, where are all the civil libertarians? Where are all, the lefty principled Democrats saying, oh my gosh, this is terrible. We can't allow this to happen. I mean, this should be an issue where it's not left versus right, it's right versus wrong, and we need everyone, regardless of what your political outpoint, to say, this is crazy, this is unconscionable. And for the Democrats out there, do they want, President Trump or anyone else, the next Republican out there, having this kind of authority, this kind of precedent, and they can do that with other agencies as well? So it is really a dangerous precedent, and we should be doing everything we can to stop it.
Thank you so much, Attorney General. That's why you're a fighter. That's why I love having you on the show. And you're exactly right. I was listening to Elon Musk and hearing, looking at his tweets, and that's what he's saying too. I think that's what any of us want, is a place where we can have an open forum to do exactly what our forefathers established under the Constitution. We could debate ideas, right? Where we don't have a government interfering in our lives and telling us what to do, or creating some sort of memory hole where they're going to change history or change who we are, like the Chinese Communist Party or, the former Stalin government, and even Vladimir Putin today. You're the best. Thank you. I'm going to be following every single one of your cases. I'm telling you. And the next time you're on the border, I want to be out there with you.
I think I know because we text each other. I was down there, I think, 2 weeks ago. We didn't even get into what's going on with the dramatic increase in high-speed pursuits. And
that's right. In Yuma, the crime.
I know.
Is that what you're going to do when you're a senator, right? That's what you're going to try to do, to change or to bring back some normalcy to Arizona?
I hope so. And I think the key, though, is that, when it comes to national security and border security, that is actually the federal government's at the apex of the power. Those are the issues the federal government should be focusing on, not trying to micromanage our schools, or not shutting off, our independent energy policies, not trying to micromanage the economy and socialize it. I mean, so there are things clearly that the U.S. Senate should be focusing on, and that's border security and national security, and not trying to micromanage our kids or our schools.
Well, I look to having you back on, and thank you so much for everything. Thank you for being on
Thanks,
today.
Sarah.
Thank you.